A dramatic peninsula, a path through the woods, a gorgeous beach. Norway Point is a place where history whispers through the pines, and the past comes up from the ground.
It's an arrowhead that I found in the spring, just walking around the beach. It was definitely First Nations who were here first.
The land had been cleared by loggers when the first European settlers arrived in the 1870s. The Robertsons from Scotland. The farming was, well, let's just say this is better cottage country. Mrs. George Robertson, eventually known to one and all as Granny Robertson, opened her house to summer visitors, and the Presbyterian ministers came. Not all ministers, but most.
My grandparents first came up to Lake of Bays in 1908.
Our family started in 1900.
Turn of the century. Yeah.
The community started as a sort of a church group, and they were all very dour Presbyterians who didn't laugh a hell of a lot on Sundays for sure.
The two-story cottages along the point were built by the enterprising clergymen with some local help.
These houses built by Presbyterian ministers perhaps lacked a few nails here and there.
They were better preachers than carpenters.
That's right.
At first they held services under a cathedral of pines.
The ministers felt that sinning was a possibility, so they built the church.
The church's cornerstone was laid in 1908. Also in 1908, the Wawa Hotel opened. It was owned by the Canadian Railway News Company, and it was a marvel. The Wawa Hotel and Norway Point bustled with activity. Here they are actually playing on logs along the shore, debris from the logging days. The lone pine was the Point's signature throughout the Wawa years and beyond. The Wawa was a great success. No room at the inn? There were tents stretched along the shore, though they were hardly roughing it.
It was huge. And it was only within a few years of them having built it that they extended it by a third or something, the number of rooms that were in it. So yeah, it was an astonishingly big hotel in a very short amount of time.
Life at the Wawa was the picture of elegance, at the princely sum of $3 to $5 a day.
This was the place to come when you went to have a holiday, and very formal. Just kind of neat.
But Edwardian splendor met Victorian attitudes on Norway Point. Some of the ministers took a dim view of the high life at the Wawa Hotel, even before they started to serve liquor. A few moved elsewhere on the lake, but most stayed, and stayed true to their principles.
Of course, they were not allowed to do anything on Sundays. So they had to go to church and read the Bible and all that sort of stuff and wear all those awful clothes. And my grandmother got a note from a doctor saying she was allowed to go swimming or play tennis or something, I can't remember, on a Sunday because it was good for her health.
The early 20th century was a heyday for Norway Point, a luxurious hotel and thriving cottagers. A game of golf at Glenmount, a picnic by the shore, a stroll along the path.
It's crazy to see what the people wore and in their costumes, in their swim costumes, and in their dressing costumes. Even the men wearing their ties and suits, sitting out on the beach. I think that's pretty amazing.
But they do look pretty severe in those old photographs.
I think they sat in porches and fanned themselves a lot of the time.
They tried to capture city life here.
In 1913, a Mohawk guide named Oski Nanton went from Norway Point to European concert halls. A cottager heard him sing and helped train his voice. That's him singing here. He sang at the church, at the Wawa, and later in London's Albert Hall. Oski Nanton Lane is a little bit of Norway Point in Toronto. Speaking of Toronto, imagine a trip north for these intrepid souls.
They would start early in the morning and train from Guelph to Toronto, and then Toronto to Huntsville, and then the portage train, and then they would take the steamer out to, I think, the end of Norway Point. There was a pier there, and Granny Robertson would come with a wheelbarrow and pick up their baggage.
There were many boats on the lake over the years. That's the Florence, Maine, on the Wawa Hotel dock. What a time it was. And then August 1923. Fire at the Wawa Hotel. It was an extraordinary tragedy. 11 people died. All women, mostly support staff, trapped as the flames rushed up the elevator shaft.
The Wawa burnt down in minutes. It was like a matchbox. It just poof.
A lot of the cottagers were extremely concerned about losing their cottages, but nevertheless, they brought their boats and came down and rescued people off the beach. It must have been an unbelievable scene to have seen that.
The hotel was not rebuilt. The point would never be the same. New cottages were constructed on the Wawa property. The Fergusons, built by Frank Leslie, the second owner of Bigwin Inn, sits on a spectacular part of the point. The Bain cottage was built in 1936. For many, the Wawa fire was not an end, but a beginning.
My grandmother put her heart and soul into this place. She just loved it.
It's part of the local experience to try to place the majestic hotel in relation to today's cottages.
As you look from the postcards from the water, it looks like probably it went close to the far side of the original Bain cottage.
This is the Wawa Terrace right here, or part of the terrace. And then moving over this way, if you can just, and you look at that cottage there, that was where the tea room or the dance hall was.
It went down, I guess, a little probably to close to the middle or the end of the Faskin cottage, I'm guessing.
So the pier actually goes straight out there, and the dock went out on an angle like this. So we kind of mark it with the buoys. So people...
The Faskins put out buoys to mark the crib where the great dock once stood. All that remains of the Wawa Hotel is the gazebo on the point. And whatever residents like Phyllis Ferguson, with her nephew Dakota, find coming out of the ground.
More china. Oh, there's a door. Is that a doorknob?
Yep.
Yeah, there's a nice doorknob.
Dunbar Cottage, one of the original two-story structures, was also a victim of the fire.
My grandfather announced to everybody there that the cottage was no longer safe because it was a two-story building, and for that reason was dangerous for fire, and that it should be torn down and something more sensible and safer should be put up in its place.
The new cottage was built, and Pam Henderson explains it's on one floor with lots of fire escapes.
This is a cottage of many doors, which have to all be locked when we leave.
Minnewawa, one of the grand old cottages, did burn down in the 1940s, and the Tyrrells soon rebuilt it. Only a few of the original cottages remain. The Osbornes retains the feel of an earlier time.
It was just a little box, one of the old minister's cottages, and Edith Vane was the person who suggested that they make the cottage bigger by putting on the verandas. And today, many years after her death, we bless her for that.
Sunset Cottage was built during the First World War. Inside, antiques take us back to a time when Dr. Dixon ran an unofficial clinic here for local cottagers. Other cottages along the shore, which were dark and hidden, have been opened up and enlivened. Granny Robertson apparently lived in this cottage. For a while, there was a Robertson farmhouse on the point near the Wawa Hotel.
Here's some bricks here from an old fireplace, I think.
It too comes out of the ground. Wawa Nisa was built in 1905. The Watts own it now. Norway Point's best fish story came from the 60s, when Holly's parents rented a few doors away.
It was the biggest lake trout ever caught out of Lake of Bays, a 35-pound lake trout. And for my dad, it was, I think, one of the most exciting experiences of his life, besides having his 5 children.
The fish is on the wall in Robinson's general store. The original church collapsed in the winter of 1943 and was immediately rebuilt. Today, the names on the church bell list Norway Point pioneers. Inside, more plaques honor those who came before.
As the loop calls over the water for its mate, so too does God call us to this place.
Like a rush wind through majestic heights, God's Spirit lifts and renews.
On its 100th anniversary, the Norway Point Church remains a vibrant part of the cottage community. While the Wawa Hotel and those ancient people in all those clothes seem as distant as yesterday's horizon, on Norway Point, the past is still present.